You may have heard that next Sunday is our annual meeting. So I feel like I feel like I can't resist telling a quick annual meeting story. In the winter 3 years ago, barely emerging from pandemic, the board, the finance council, the minister faced an impossible reality in crafting the budget for the coming year. The board had already cut back mightily during pandemic, and emerging from it, people were tired and engagement was challenging, capacity was so much less. Folks who had drifted away weren't all coming back again. This wasn't just us here. This was everything everywhere 3 years ago. That was only 3 years ago. So they proposed to the congregation a budget with a deficit of $90,000, which was a good chunk of the total, and a 3-year plan to get back to balanced. We'd reduce that by a third each year. This is sort of really glamorous stuff you come to church for, right? Well, I'm happy to say 3 years later, the board has a balanced budget for you to vote on next Sunday. But that's fair. That's fair, but that's actually not the story I want to tell. The actual story is that this week, I heard about another community nonprofit in another part of the country, same kind of size as us, who had run a similar deficit and now are headed into their 5th year of doing that. They've used up their reserves and emptied their accounts. They're looking for loans. They don't yet know that they're already in an existential crisis as an organization. When I tell you the story that way, it sounds so obvious. From the outside, from 1,000 miles away, without any additional context, it sounds like what they're doing is somewhere between absurd and tragic. Doing the same thing and expecting different results. This is one definition of insanity. But it is so easy to fall into this pattern of doing the same thing that you've done before, but telling yourself that this time it's going to be different. Addicts know this pattern really well. This time, doing exactly the same thing that I've done before will be different. I got sober from alcohol as a young adult, but I still remember very clearly the way my brain worked. It went something like this. If we pick up in spring, you know those nights in early spring where for the first time you can smell the earth again? Like that night, and it just feels so good. Something's coming back alive. I would smell that smell in early spring and think, this is just the sort of night that a drink would be wonderful. And then we're headed towards it already. You know the swallows came back this last week or two. And those summer days with the swallows going overhead and that long, late twilight, everything starts to cool down and the breeze blows through. And I would think to myself, oh, this is just the right time of year for a drink. And then in the fall, with that first little bit of wood smoke and the crunch of leaves and the late afternoon light turning towards evening, I would think to myself, this is just the right sort of time of year for a drink. And then in the winter months, the snow, when it's so quiet with the snow outside and the world is still and you've got on long underwear underneath your jeans, I would think this is just the right time of year. My brain, all the way around 365 days of the year, never said, hey, go get drunk. It said, there's a reason. There's a reason. This day is different. This sort of day is the right day. It's the right moment. This today is different from everything else that's ever happened before. And this time it's going to be different. And I'd wake up the next day wondering, what just happened again? To be clear, though, I actually don't think this is just how addict brains work. I think this is how addiction works, but I don't think it's just addict brain. I think this is how human brains work. And addicts just, we're ambitious. We took it to an extra level, kind of above the regular. It can be so difficult to see that we're making the same mistake over and over and over again. It shows up in 1,000 ways. You leave, finally, after so long, you figure out that you're in an unhealthy relationship and you leave it and you go to another unhealthy relationship. Or you twist yourself into a stressed and sleepless, miserable knot of anxiety to get some work project done and finish and swear you'll never do it again, and then the next project is just the same. Or you run a little bit more into debt from 1 month to the next, or as an organization from 1 year to the next. Next year is going to be different. The first thing in all of this, to make a better mistake, is to recognize that one is happening. And part of what keeps us from seeing that pattern is that it can be scary and overwhelming to face the reality that something's gone wrong is going wrong. Sometimes acknowledging that mistake, the failure, even just to yourself, seems incomprehensibly awful. I remember, I very unpleasantly remembered this morning what it was like being in 9th grade honors algebra 2. In that first quarter, for some of you, the subject was different, but the feeling was the same. And every day that went by, I saw my grasp of the subject dwindling. I didn't understand anything that was going on. And equally as overwhelming as that feeling of not understanding it was the sense that it is very important not to tell anyone this. And to just keep on pushing into this thing that's not working until at last, after failing that first semester, I think, I switched down into the easier algebra class and life got so much better. The first thing to do to make a better mistake is to recognize that one's happening, even when it is scary, even when it feels on the inside incomprehensibly awful to acknowledge it. The Buddhist teacher Pema Chodron says, failure feels raw. I think she says the most significant thing about failure is often we think of it as something that happens to us from the outside. And we either blame it on somebody else or something else, but then we move away from the rawness. We move away from holding the rawness of vulnerability in our heart by blaming it on someone else. Or the really common thing, we feel bad about ourselves and label ourselves a failure. We have this feeling that there's something fundamentally wrong with us, something basically wrong with us. Now, it's important to say, I really just don't think that all failure and mistakes are completely your own fault. I think that the idea that you are entirely responsible for creating all of your reality and everything that happens in it, it's just bad theology. We can argue about that later if you feel otherwise. But so much of failure can feel painful and can turn back inwards against yourself. And two wonderful, effective ways to stop from having to engage with it are to blame someone else or to throw your hands up and to say, I'm broken. So Pema Chodron continues and says, when you start to feel that way about yourself, maybe instead of doing the habitual thing of labeling yourself a failure or thinking there's something wrong with you, you could get curious instead. If there's a lot of, inside your head, if the weather in there is a lot of, I am bad, I am terrible, I am wrong, I am broken, if you notice that, you can start to say instead, wait a minute, what am I feeling here? Maybe what's happening isn't that I am existentially a failure. Maybe I'm just hurting. Maybe this just hurts, and that's what this is right now. She says, this is what human beings have felt from the beginning of time. If you want to be a full, complete human being, if you want to be genuine and not pretend that everything is either one way or the other, but you can hold the fullness of life in your heart, then this is the opportunity when you can get curious about what's going on and listen to the storylines, and don't buy the storylines that blame it all on your own brokenness. Sometimes, that is, the intensity of regret or shame or self-loathing makes you want to run away. Those feelings are so overwhelming that you just absolutely don't want to engage with them. But what if the intensity of that feeling, the very experience of that intensity, was a reminder to you that instead of running from it, you could slow down and get curious? What if that feeling was actually a seed for empathy towards yourself? Compassion towards yourself and the curiosity that it makes room for are tools to make better mistakes. Compassion for yourself makes it safe enough to be curious. And it's important not to skip the compassion part. I just don't think you can, hate yourself into being a better person. I haven't seen it work very well or for very long. Someone told me once that the process of learning starts by going from unconscious incompetence to conscious incompetence. And from there onwards towards conscious competence. But the more time you spend learning how to do something, the more you realize what you're not doing right. The more you try to get better at a thing, the more mistakes you make. Well, what then? Self-compassion makes curiosity possible to see what's going on inside yourself, not to be overwhelmed by those mistakes, but to recognize them as part of the process, as part of the journey. I think what it really does is make courage possible, or easier anyway. The courage to take that inner journey. The great Quaker teacher Parker Palmer tells this story. He says, in my early 40s, I decided to go on a program called Outward Bound. I was on the edge of my first depression, a fact I only knew dimly at the time. And I thought that Outward Bound might be a place to shake up my life and to learn some of the things I needed to know. I chose the week-long course at Hurricane Island off the coast of Maine. It was a week of great teaching, deep community, genuine growth. He says, it was also a week of fear and loathing. Palmer says, in the middle of the week, I faced the challenge I was most afraid of. One of our instructors backed me up to the edge of a cliff 110 feet above solid ground. And now I should say, I know some of you are climbers. Some of you are serious climbers. But for the sake of this next part, just imagine you're regular people. Backed up to the edge of this cliff and tied a very thin rope around my waist, a rope that looked ill-kempt, that seemed to be starting to unravel, and told me to start rappelling down the cliff. Do what? I said. Just go, the instructor explained in typical fashion. So I went and immediately slammed into a ledge 4 feet down with bone-jarring, brain-jarring force. He says, the instructor looked down at me. I don't think you've quite got it. Right? I said, being in no position to disagree. What am I supposed to do? He said, the only way to do this is to lean back as far as you can until you've got your body at a right angle to the cliff so that your weight's on your feet. It's counterintuitive. It's the only way that works. I knew he was wrong. I knew the trick was to hug the mountain, to stay as close to the rock face as I could. So I tried it again and slammed into the wall again, 4 feet down. You still don't have it, the instructor said. Okay, tell me again. Lean way back and take the next step. And it worked. Until halfway down, approaching a deep hole in the face of the rock, I knew I'd need to change course and swing around to the left or the right. I also knew for a certainty that attempting to do so would lead directly to my death. So I froze, paralyzed with fear. And the second instructor let me hang there, trembling for what seemed like a long time, and finally shouted up, "Parker, is anything wrong?" I have 12 witnesses to the fact that I said the following: "I don't want to talk about it." Right? I know that feeling. I probably said that to my parents around week 5 of Algebra 2. I don't want to talk about it. "Well," said the second instructor, "it's time you learned the Outward Bound motto." I thought, I'm going to die and I'm being given a motto. But she shouted 10 words. 10 words I hope never to forget, words whose impact, whose meaning I still feel. If you can't get out of it, get into it. And she spoke them so compellingly, they bypassed my mind and went into my flesh and animated my legs and feet. No helicopter was coming to rescue me. The instructor was not going to pull me back up the cliff again. There was no parachute. There was no way out. No way out except to get into it. So I started moving, and in a few minutes, I made it down safely. Why would anyone want to embark on the daunting inner journey, he asks. Moving towards mistake and failure, the things that we haven't done or haven't done as well, the voices inside of ourselves that say we haven't just made a mistake, but we are existentially wrong in the world. Why would anyone want to turn back around and face those things instead of run from them? Parker Palmer says, there is no way out of our inner life. So we'd better get into it. On that inward and downward spiritual journey, the only way out is in and through. Sometimes we're unable or unwilling to see our own part in the mistakes we make. It feels too painful. And I have no guidance, I have no bullet list for you on do not make the following mistakes. And if you just memorize those, you're going to be fine. I have instead a much more challenging suggestion for making better mistakes, which is that when you feel shame or pain or beat yourself up, let that be instead an invitation to curiosity and compassion. Ask instead, what am I feeling here? Maybe what's happening is not that I am a failure. Maybe I'm just hurting. Maybe this situation is just bad and painful. After all, we're not supposed to be perfect, but instead to be full grown, to grow up into our lives, to become people among people, vitally engaged with life, being entirely. This work of being human, we can't get out of it, so we get into it. Amen.